Good morning, Morning Musings by Melinda. How's everybody doing today? We are going to continue talking on suicide. That's our series this week. Again, I know it's a tough subject to talk about and to hear about, but it's an important subject. In fact, got some information yesterday that was published regarding the depression epidemic after the pandemic, and that the kind of mental health issues that are created by that pandemic and the fact that they are really in that 12 to 16-year-old range, looking at that information is very daunting. We really have to have some awareness here and open this discussion so that we are able to put some things into balance and perspective. So I wanted to talk to you about what leads to suicide. Now, understand that this is not always a box that someone fits in, because I have talked to people that have felt there was absolutely no warning sign whatsoever, and or when they looked back at it, they missed some of the warning signs. So we want to talk about that today. So, there's no single cause for suicide. It's a combination of all kinds of things that have to do with mental health and conditions that go with how we engage in life. So the mental health conditions that are risk factors include depression and substance use problems. Oftentimes someone gets caught in a substance abuse cycle and doesn't know how to get themselves out of it, so they may leave through suicide, either by accident and or because they just feel hopeless and helpless to get out of that opioid, usually, cycle. Bipolar disorder, of course, has manic highs and lows. The interesting thing about bipolar disorder is normally with bipolar disorder, it's a manic time where somebody makes that I wanted to say decision, but I guess I will, makes that decision or has that kind of fugue state of leaving in that way because they have enough energy at that time. Schizophrenia, personality traits of aggression, mood changes, and poor relationships. There is a lot of times that I talk to somebody from the other side of the veil that left through suicide because of a relationship issue. Conduct disorders, meaning, that someone doesn't feel like they ever can get ahead in life, and even though they're the common denominator, there's a lot of anger and their conduct is not warranting a balanced and peaceful life. Anxiety disorders, and then serious health conditions, including pain, actually leads to suicide at times. There are people who don't want to go through a terminal illness and make those choices, and traumatic brain injury. So there's some of the mental health issues. How about environmental? Environmental issues include access to lethal means, including firearms and drugs. Although I will tell you that many of the people that I talk to have lost someone through a gun does not necessarily blame the gun, because they think that the person was determined to leave anyway. They would find other means. Prolonged stress such as harassment, bullying, relationship problems, or unemployment. Stressful events like rejection, divorce, financial crisis, and other life transitions or loss. Exposure to another person's suicide, or to graphic or sensational accounts of suicide. Now, this doesn't mean that everyone that has some of these life stressors has that kind of a thought process of transitioning that way, but it's something to give you some knowledge if you have someone that just doesn't have the tools in their toolbox for coping with some of life's problems. Historically, if there are previous suicide attempts, a family history of suicide, and childhood abuse, neglect, or trauma will be some of the reasons that people transition that way. There are factors that are necessary to help people with these things: access to mental health care, teaching someone how to use tools in their toolbox, being proactive, feeling connected to family and community support, limited access to lethal means, cultural and religious beliefs that encourage connecting and help seeking. In other words, helping somebody connect to their higher power, that kind of thing. And then there are warning signs. If the person talks about killing themselves, if the person talks about feeling hopeless, if the person talks about having no reason to live, if a person talks about being a burden to others, which is a very common theme when I talk to somebody on the other side of the veil who have transitioned that way, if a person talks about feeling trapped, if a person has unbearable pain, if their behavior shows an increased use of alcohol or drugs, if their behavior is searching online for methodology in order to transition, if they're withdrawing from activities, if they're isolating from family and friends, if they're sleeping too much or too little, if they're visiting or calling people to sort of say goodbye, if they're giving away their prized possessions, if they're aggressive, if they are fatigued. Okay, so they may also display depression, anxiety, loss of interest, irritability, humiliation and shame, agitation, anger, and so on. So I hope that this helps you to understand. I'm sorry that your friend lost his brother, Mary. It's just really a very hard subject to really kind of put in a nutshell for amusing, but I think it's so important that we open the dialogue and I'll talk about it, don't you? And start to talk about the signs and signals of someone having that kind of a thought process to transition that way, and then helping others without the shame blame game in order to get them through it if they've lost somebody that way. And speaking of that, I have a lovely friend of mine. Her name is Theodora Skiro, Theo, as we call her, who is an educator, and she actually wrote a wonderful book. And we will put the book up on this musing, but it's a culture of caring, a suicide prevention guide for schools K through 12. Because she was an educator, she wants educators to understand this. So it was created as a resource for educators who want to know how to get started and what steps to take to create a suicide prevention plan that will work for their schools and districts. This is a community problem. We have to get schools involved and churches involved. We have to be able to do this. It's written from the perspective as a school principal that Thea was, and a survivor of suicide loss. And so she really understands both sides of this. And so she hopes that any teacher, school counselor, psychologist, or principal, or district administrator can pick this book up and use it as an easy tool to help with the schools. So, this is something, again, that if you happen to know somebody that is a teacher or a school administrator or something along those lines, I'm sure it was very hard to lose your brother also, Kathy. I'm sorry. So if you know a teacher or a school administrator, what a great gift for the end of the year to thank them for their service, especially during a pandemic, especially since they are dealing with children who are probably struggling with a lot of different emotional issues regarding the pandemic. And so that's a great book. We're going to put that up. Remember to look up the website for Tapped Through Appearance Tears, which is a group of families who are really working hard to get the message out about understanding suicide and its aftermath, and the fact that they still have connection with their children on the other side of the veil. All righty, so I hope that you have a wonderful day. I'm looking forward to mine, and I will see you tomorrow.